Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live right here on Giants.com and the Giants mobile app. Schmeelk Meadow with you. The phone number is 201-939-4513 or hashtag Giants Chat on Twitter. We'll get to your questions that way as well. Today, we're going to take a little tour around the Big Ten. We're going to talk Illinois prospects with Scott Richey. That'll come your way at around 12:40, give or take. But first, we will have Louie Vaccher joining us. He's the publisher and managing editor of the Wildcat Report, covering Northwestern athletics. And Northwestern has a trio of players that are draft eligible this year that are expected all to be drafted. And we'll get the insights on those players from him. Louie, you got John Schmeelk and Lance Meadow here on Big Blue Kickoff Live on Giants.com. How you doing today, man?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing great. Thanks so much for joining us. And I want to start here because I think the first Wildcat off the board is going to be Peter Skoronski. Give me a little compare and contrast with Rashawn Slater, an offensive tackle that came out of Northwestern, who I loved, by the way. I wanted the Giants to pick him when they came up in that draft. They didn't. Give me a little compare and contrast between Skoronski and Slater.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they're very kind of similar players, and it's funny because the knock on both of them coming out has been arm length, right? Slater was, I think it was 33 inches, and people were wondering it was borderline, and, you know, he was second-team All-Pro. Skoronski's 32 and a quarter, I believe it is.
Yep.
So that seems to be the big issue, but you look at everything else about this kid, and he is going to be a perennial stud in the NFL. I mean, he's got the feet. He's a strong, powerful kid. You know, they came in very different players, right? Slater was a guy that had, I think, maybe two other Power 5 offers, very low-key kid, played for a low-profile program in Texas, but came in the first day, played, you know, started at right tackle, then moved to left. And Skoronski came in with big fanfare. He was a huge get out of the Chicago area, a four-star kid with just a ton of major offers, and he picks Northwestern, and he came in with very high expectations, and I think he exceeded them. You know, he had an outstanding career. I think he's a little bigger, stronger. He's got maybe a better natural build than Slater, but he started at left tackle because Slater opted out in 2020. So he, you know, started every game of his career out there at left tackle and was just outstanding for Northwestern for the last 3 years.
Well, speaking of the position, I think the big question, Louie, is where he's going to end up in the NFL. I know he's been at left tackle, and he started since his freshman year, but there's some speculation. Maybe they'll move him inside if there's a team that thinks he's a better presence on the interior. Where do you see his fit on the NFL level at this point?
Yeah, I think he can play either one. I think it depends on what a team needs. I think, you know, if they see him as a tackle, he might go a little higher, right? That's it's greater value put on tackles than guards. But I think he can play either one. You know, if you look at the tape and watch this kid's feet and his kick step and all that kind of stuff, I don't think, you know, a 3/4 inch that his arms are 3/4 inches less than ideal is going to play that big a role. I think if you need inside player, he can do that. If you need a guy on the outside, he can do that. And I think he's a guy that he's going to start, you know, probably week one and be your starting tackle for the next decade plus. You know, I think he's that kind of a player.
Any matchups this year, Louie, that gave him issues, or maybe either the arm length or something else came up where he went up against some really top competitors or top teams, and he wasn't as dominant as he usually was against some others?
No, I mean, I think, did he give up a sack this year? Maybe it was one. I can't remember, but it's only been a handful in his 3 years as a starter. I mean, he's not infallible. I mean, he gets beat sometimes like anybody else, but he was a dominant player. I know, you know, he went, it's funny because Lucas Van Ness of Iowa, he played him in high school, and I happened to, you know, my son played at Barrington High School where Van Ness went, so I saw them play each other in high school, and then they went out, you know, they were against each other at Iowa and Northwestern, and, you know, I know that that's an interesting matchup. That's a guy that, you know, Van Ness, I think, gave him a little bit of a problem at times, but I think Skoronski, you know, everything about this kid, from his technique, his power in the run game, his work ethic, he's got that love for the game. You know, I think he wants to be great. And I don't think it matters to him too much whether he plays guard or tackle. I think he can, you know, he's fine with either one. And I think, like I said, I think he's a surefire NFL starter on day one.
And, Louie, you were right. I just looked it up. He gave up 1 sack this past season and then 2 prior. So they've been far and few. He's been pretty steady during the course of his career.
Yeah.
As far as the evaluation of his game, pass protection versus run blocking, how would you assess what facet may jump out more and where perhaps he can improve in either one of those?
Yeah, I think he's a more natural run blocker, probably just because he's a powerful kid. He's got that ideal build. He's very thick, and he's a guy that I think he's a naturally aggressive player. But you look at his techniques as a pass blocker too, whether it's his kick step and his hand placement and all that kind of stuff. I trust the experts much more than I do myself, but I know that he's a well-rounded player that can do it all for you. I think he's been strong in pass protection. He's been strong as a run blocker. I think run blocker may be a little more natural to him, but he's been pretty darn good in both.
All right, let's go to Adi Tamiwa out of Barre here, Louie. And this is the way I'll phrase the question to you. Were even you, someone that's probably watched him take every snap of his college career, fall down shocked at the numbers he put up at the NFL Combine and how dominant he was at the Senior Bowl?
I wasn't shocked, no. I mean, I was surprised at that 4.49 at 282 pounds. I mean, that's
I think we all were.
Right there. That's a big man that was rolling pretty fast. But he's an outstanding athlete. Always had that. He's very powerful inside. And I always thought, that at the next level he could be a tackle. I know he doesn't have the ideal height for the outside, and he may have to gain a little weight to play that 3 technique, but I think that's where he'll ultimately be a fit. And I know that now he's rocketed into the first round. I see a lot of mock drafts that you see him as a first rounder. I think he can be that guy. He didn't have, and maybe part of it was he was playing maybe out of position at end, but he didn't have like the production numbers you might expect for someone that put up those kind of numbers.
How much did he play end versus tackle, Louie? I'm sorry for interrupting. How much did he play end versus tackle? Was he inside just a little bit? Some? How would you kind of talk about how they played him?
Yeah, they put him inside mostly on passing downs. I would say 3/4 of the time he was playing defensive end, and that was throughout his career. Like he started, I think it was his sophomore year as a defensive end, and then they started moving him inside on passing downs. They bring in a speed rusher on the outside. But again, I think he's a guy that can play either. I always thought he made more sense as a tackle for the NFL. I think, for Northwestern, he was a good guy to have on that edge because he could set the edge and he could still get after the quarterback. He didn't have the huge production numbers you might see from someone with that kind of athleticism. I think that's going to be the evaluation with him is, does his film live up to the numbers you saw at the Combine? But, he's going to be a first rounder, maybe early second round if he falls that much. But and another outstanding kid, really smart, works hard. And he's going to be an outstanding player in the locker room too.
Well, Louie, to your point, in the NFL, teams are looking for the guys on the interior, whether they get the sack or not, to create opportunities for guys on the edge. So I'm curious, considering it seems as if he's got a very strong bull rush and applied a lot of pressure from the interior, even if he doesn't become a huge sack guy at the next level, how much do you think he can cause enough disruption that if a team figures, hey, we got 2 really good edge rushers, we put him in the middle, look out, now they got to really pick their poison in terms of who they want to focus on, and it opens up opportunities more so for their pass rushers on the edge.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's would be an ideal position for him as a guy on the interior that can be disruptive because he's very explosive off the ball. He's got that get off like a defensive end, but he's also got enough power. He's a really strong kid. If you watch the film, he can get a push inside, and that's where I think he can wreak havoc inside. He may not get the tackle, like you're saying. He may not make the sack or get the TFL, but he's going to be disruptive inside, and other people will, do it for him. So he's always been that, he's got some quick twitch in him. He's got that speed to power kind of thing. He's very, very strong, very explosive in tight spaces. And I think he's an ideal 3 technique that can get in some penetration inside and create havoc and disrupt the play.
And Louie, just to add to that, I think his height helps him. I think it creates natural leverage combined with his 30. You talk about short arms for Skoronski, right? Well, he's got 34-inch arms, despite the fact he's only 6'2", and I think that kind of helps him with that natural leverage inside. That'll probably help out, even if he's a little bit lighter. And I'm sure you've seen that, right? Even though maybe he's only 280, those long arms and his stature probably help him hold the point of attack a little bit better, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He's very good at keeping guys away from his body, right? He's got that long reach that can keep those guys from getting inside on him. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, that leverage thing is an important point because that's something I think he excels at is that power in tight spaces. He can generate a lot of push, a lot of power, inside in a tight space.
Well, on a related note to that, even if you don't get the sacks, to me, if you get the tackles for loss, you can be disruptive in the backfield. I mean, that to me is half the battle. What jumped out to you, Louie, about his ability when maybe not getting the sack, still maybe being able to disrupt the run game or get some hits on the quarterback? What specifically with respect to that facet of his game that stood out to you over the course of his career?
Yeah, the one thing I've always said about him from day one is he's got an outstanding motor. That kid goes at 100 miles an hour every single play, and he's a guy that will chase the quarterback and, get to the other sideline. He may not make the tackle, but he's going to, give pursuit and put some pressure on the quarterback. That's one thing he's always had. And he was always strong enough and big enough to hold that edge in the run game too. He was an outstanding kind of two-way defensive end that could rush the passer and also, anchor down that corner against the run. So, you look at that. I think the motor thing is going to really pop out to coaches, and I think it's going to make him, more valuable as a guy. And even if people want to put him on the outside, I think he's more natural on the inside. But he's got that versatility, and he's got that that motor that won't quit. And I think that really you'll see that on film as well.
All right, let me jump to Cameron Mitchell here, the cornerback, 5'11", 191. We have not talked much about him on the show, Louie. So give us a nice little thumbnail on Mitchell, the type of player that he is, how they used him, and what he could bring to an NFL team, and where you think he might get drafted, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think he's probably, from what I've read and everything, a mid to late round guy. He's, he's 5'11", 191, but he's a very athletic, aggressive player. Loves to play against the run. He's a guy that came up and made tackles, very tough physical player. He may not have that ideal size on the outside, but I think he may, as a slot corner kind of guy in a nickel, he could be a valuable asset there. He doesn't have, I don't think, the great straight line speed, but he's very quick. He's got that quickness to him. A lot of people compare him to Greg Newsome, who was a first rounder 2 years ago from Northwestern. He's not that kind of player. I don't think he's, he wasn't the lockdown guy that, went one-on-one with David Bell, and he had a lot of swagger to him. He's not that, but he's a very capable, physical, aggressive cornerback that I think, could fit in, like I said, as maybe a slot corner kind of guy, and probably a mid to late round guy, I would imagine.
You mentioned, Louie, that he was aggressive. The one thing that was noticeable is the penalty numbers over the course of his career, and you could see he's maybe a bit handsy. How much do you think that may have come back to bite him over the course of his career, and do you think that that's something that could be improved and corrected as he makes the jump to the NFL?
Yeah, I think you're right. That was the term I was going to use, handsy, too. He did have some penalties against him, and I think sometimes maybe that aggressiveness works against him a little bit, like you're pointing out. But that's something I think that with coaching, it's the way I look at it, he's going to have to fix it, right? If he doesn't, he's not going to last very long. So he's going to, and he's a great kid. He's a hard worker. He's going to work to improve those things. And, I think he'll react to coaching, and it's something. Again, he's an aggressive, physical guy. I think that's a positive. So certainly against the run and inside, if you're a slot corner, I think those are positive attributes they've got to rein it in a little bit. I agree with that.
Final one before we say goodbye, real quick, Louie. You can give me a quick 15, 20 seconds. I haven't listened to the corner talk much, but I did listen to Skoronski and Adibari at the Combine, and both guys seem like top-notch individuals, smart dudes that are going to be a credit to whatever locker room they wind up in, correct?
Yeah, no question about it. They're smart guys. They're very coachable. You know, Fitz talked from day one about, you know, you tell Peter Skoronski things one time and that's it. That's all you need to do. He kind of coaches himself, and he's a guy that they plugged in from day one as a starter and didn't have to worry about him. And he got better each year, you know, with small minor steps. And I think that's the same thing with Adibari. He was a guy that was very raw physical talent, but they turned him into a player, and you know, he became a technician out there. These guys got great work ethic. They want to be great. You know, they love the game, and I think that's going to show through for sure.
Louie, good stuff. Louie Vaccher, publisher and managing editor of WildcatReport.com. We thank you for joining us, Louie. Enjoy your off season, and good luck to Northwestern next year.
Yeah, thanks, Louie.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. And now we're going to head over to the Illini, the fellow Big Ten team. And joining us to talk about them is Scott Richey. He covers the Illini for the News-Gazette. Scott, you got John Schmeelk and Lance Meadow here in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Hope all is well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
So I hope you guys have a lot of good underclass cornerbacks and safeties, because you've basically sent your entire secondary to the NFL over the past couple of years. Let's start with Devon Witherspoon, who I know some people like as the top corner in the draft. The one thing I want to kind of dig in with you a little bit, some people have kind of termed him a bit of a one-year wonder, where he really made a huge jump in his final year. He's a lot of experience, but didn't play at that level until his final year. Can you talk about the growth he showed over the course of his career as an Illini and a cornerback?
Sure. Well, I mean, I just remember when he showed up in Champaign, and he was kind of a surprise addition to the roster. Training camp was like 3 days in, and all of a sudden there's this new cornerback in the mix. And it was one of those deals where he was going to a JUCO and then got, you know, things in order, and, you know, wound up at Illinois, and turns out it was a pretty good find by Lovie Smith. But, yeah, I mean, he played right away, you know, as a freshman. You know, was on the field early. And, you know, it took a couple of years for him to maybe find, you know, his footing, but I wouldn't say he was necessarily a one-year wonder. Like, he started to thrive when Brett Bielema got the Illinois job, and Ryan Walters, you know, was defensive coordinator, and Aaron Henry, you know, was the cornerbacks coach, was a big part of his development. But it's been like the last 2 years where he has sort of started to separate himself as maybe one of those corners that, you know, opposing quarterbacks were a little more hesitant to throw at. And when they did, it didn't turn out particularly well. He had 25 pass breakups in his career, and 23 of them came in the last 2 years. So I can get where people are like, well, you know, he didn't come on right away, but that's kind of college football. There's not always guys that have, you know, breakout freshman years. You know, you can find stars that develop later, and like he just, I think the one thing that stayed consistent with Devin and throughout his entire college career is just his approach to the game. He's not like the biggest corner, but he plays a whole heck of a lot bigger.
Oh, he's physical, man. You watch him on tape, he likes to hit. He is a physical player. Whew.
I mean, and like that was him as a freshman. Like, he was even skinnier back then, and he wasn't afraid to mix it up. And I mean, I just think back to, you know, this past season, playing at Indiana on a Friday night. I think it was the Hoosiers' first offensive play of the game. Throw this.
Oh, laid out the running back.
Yeah, it's just like, I still remember that play, because he not only did he hit him hard, but like he knew that play was happening before it happened. Like, he developed a really good sense of what's asked for of that position, and I mean, he can, you know, combine maybe that football IQ with a guy that's going to go out and pop somebody, and I kind of have to like that.
Well, and you need to be able to defend the run if you're an elite corner in today's NFL. I think that's what separates the top guys from the rest of the pack. So where does that come from, in your estimation? Is that something that he initially came with when he arrived in Illinois, or did that also slowly develop, similar to what we saw with respect to the last 2 seasons and his skill set in terms of stopping the pass?
I mean, he was always willing to get in there, and help stop the run. But, really, his development kicked up a notch in the last 2 years. And I think, the change in the coaching staff has a lot to do with that. There's just some consistency finally, in these last 2 years with Brett Bielema and his staff, hearing the same voices, the same instruction, same scheme, and Devin thrived. But yeah, he's always. I mean, he was never afraid to get in there and mix it up. And in the Big Ten, like, if you're gonna have good defense, you have to be able to defend the run, and that comes from all 11 on the field.
And by the way, Brett Bielema, former Giants assistant, he came from the Giants to go to Illinois. So a little connection there. How'd they use him? And maybe it changed with the 2 coaching staffs. I'd like to hear, was he better in zone? Was he used more in man? Is he better in press? From what I watched, I think he's a guy that you want to put in press man. But from watching him his whole career, how was he used, and what do you think he was best at?
Well, I mean, it was 2 entirely different schemes when you go from Lovie Smith and running his own defense. He didn't have a defensive coordinator. I don't think he was a defensive coordinator essentially for Devin's first 2 years. And so what Brett Bielema and Ryan Walters were running. So it went from playing more zone early to almost all man. This last 2 years. I mean, obviously some instances where this is more zone coverage, but like, Brian Walters had the trust to put his quarterbacks on an island a little bit, let them work in man-to-man coverage, because that's just, I think, the way they believe in defensive football. Brian Walters and Brett Bielema both. But yeah, anything that lets him take advantage of his physicality, to bump a receiver at the line of scrimmage, knock them off their route, like that probably puts Devin Witherspoon in the best position. And he's athletic enough to stick with those receivers. I mean, the completion percentage against him was notably low, especially this last year.
With respect to his frame, you brought this up earlier, is there concern about durability holding up over the course of his career? Because, we talked about how physical he plays, and he plays a lot bigger than his size. But if we're to project, okay, now we're going to the NFL, physicality is really on steroids, essentially. How do you see him holding up from a physical standpoint at the next level?
I think he'll be fine. I think he missed 2 games maybe in 4 years at Illinois, and it wasn't like a major injury, just sort of a little nagging issue that just cost him a couple in the middle of his junior season. So, and he's not the biggest guy, but like, he was able to put on some good weight since he arrived in Champaign, and I think especially like the last couple of years working with Tank Wright, their strength and conditioning coach, major focus on soft tissue and avoiding those injuries, because those are the ones that can get you for 2 games, 3 games, sure. And not. But yeah, he put on the good weight, on his frame, and I think physically the next level is not going to be a major issue for him in that regard.
Last one for me on Witherspoon, and Lance can tackle the 2 safeties here next. Watching the tape, one thing I noticed about Witherspoon, after every play, he lets you hear about what he did, man. He seems a little chirpy. He seems to have a little chip on his shoulder. Obviously, you have a better feel for that than I do. I'm just watching, all 22 and seeing how he reacts after some of these tackles and pass breakups. But it seems like he's one of these, like, type A personality cornerbacks that kind of has that little chip that he's going to carry with him wherever he goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because there's 2 Devin Witherspoons. There's on the field, where if you ask any of his teammates or coaches, like, there's nobody that talks more than him. Then off the field, he's a little quieter, and like, I know, sort of the media people at Illinois, try to tell him, like, hey, Devin, just give these guys 10% of what you're on the field, and they love it. I mean, once you get him going, he's good. But on the field, he's confident, and there probably maybe is a little chip because the way his college career started, like he was going to wind up at a JUCO, but he got his house in order, and got to Illinois, but obviously didn't experience a ton of success early just as a team. But I don't think he was ever not confident that he could be this kind of player.
As far as the safeties, I want to start with Sidney Brown because what jumps out to me, number one, is his measurables. But number two, he was far more opportunistic as a fifth-year senior this past year compared to what we saw at the beginning of his career. Why the jump in terms of those opportunistic plays?
I think that was a result of just the level of trust that Ryan Walters had in Sidney Brown to just kind of be a read and react safety, kind of do his own thing. I mean, there's parameters within the scheme of like what his position called for, but Ryan Walters gave Sidney Brown a lot of freedom to improvise a little bit, to make changes, to the play calls, just in terms of what he would do. And I mean, some of it, right place at the right time, but he, especially late in this past year, that's where most of his picks came from. And I think it was just a combination of that trust, and then the fact that he was playing his fifth year of college football, because he was on the field as a freshman in 2018, playing a lot, and that didn't change for the next 4 years. Like, he just had a lot of experience, and I think he knew the game better.
Yeah, by the way, I love Sidney at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was fantastic. He's rocked up. I mean, I don't know what his body fat percentage is, but that dude is ripped. How did they use Brown and Martin? Because, it's easy to call people safety now, but it's really three different positions in one, right? You have the box guy who's almost more like a linebacker. You have the slot corner guy. You have your center fielder free safety. You have split safeties. What roles were they used in generally? Maybe both, maybe everything. And then what did each of those two guys excel at over the course of their careers, depending on where they were played?
Yeah, well, I guess start with Sidney Brown. And they played him in the box primarily. And you mentioned, his body, and I mean, the dude's jacked, and he's sort of that physical in the box safety that's just kind of that prototype. Obviously, a guy that's comfortable in coverage, as well. As far as I'm not sure if he's going by Jartavius or we always called him Quan because that was what all his teammates.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
Quan Martin. He played everywhere in the secondary, and essentially in his Illinois career, but really the last 2 years had kind of settled into that nickel slot corner spot. And then when they had 5 DBs on the field, when they went to 4, he'd slide back and play free safety. But yeah, he has the versatility to play, I think, probably all 3 safety spots, and you could stick him out at corner and he'd find a way to get the job done. Just a freak athlete, really. And I was not surprised by his measurables at the combine, especially that vertical, because I just remember when he arrived at Illinois, Coach Zixab was talking about his athleticism and the fact that when he was in high school, won a slam dunk contest. He was a junior. It's at the City of Palms tournament. It's kind of a huge basketball tournament in Florida over the Christmas holiday, and I found some videos on YouTube at the time, and he's got hops, and so I wasn't surprised where he essentially maxed out the vertical.
Yeah, 44 vert, 11-1 broad, by the way, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I was like, well, it makes sense because he was throwing down windmill jams at 6 foot as a junior in high school. But yeah, he kind of just settled into being that guy that was going to play all over the secondary, and really embraced that. But primarily it was in that slot corner spot where you could kind of take advantage of the true versatility of the skill set, in coverage, but also the guy playing closer to the line of scrimmage that could jump up and run coverage as well.
with respect to football IQ, sometimes the safety gets the green dot helmet in the NFL, has to really be the extension of the defensive coordinator. Where do you see in terms of their ability and putting on their plate to really be the coach on the field at the next level for both Brown and Martin with respect to that?
Well, I think probably give Sidney Brown the green dot as soon as he gets to the league. I mean, as he came in as a freshman and is like, and this is a pretty mature 18-year-old. And he was a treat to cover. He was willing, open, willing to talk about anything. And, like you just see over this 5 years just how much he developed on the field. Because I think early he was getting by on being pretty strong for his age and pretty athletic, but just the more he played, the more he was able to really tap into that football IQ. And I think Quan Martin, same thing, just the experience, and he grew as a leader, I think, later in his career, just because he was asked to do it more, and I think he, on the field, really filled that role as well. So I think both could probably handle that with little trouble.
Twin brother to Sidney, Chase Brown, the running back. And I don't quite understand why people are just saying, fourth round for Chase Brown. He has all the production you would ever want at Illinois, right? He proved to be a good interior runner, outside runner. He caught balls out of the backfield. He ran a 4.43 at the combine. I don't quite know why people aren't higher on him. Can you explain it? Give me your lowdown on Chase Brown.
I mean, I guess I can't explain it other than running backs have lost a little bit of value in the draft just because I think maybe organizations feel like they can find guys that they can run 2 or 3 out there, and that's good. But Chase Brown probably going to be pretty good for somebody at the next level. And, I mean, we talked about Sidney's body. Well, I mean, they're twins, and, they're both ripped. Those two, found themselves, not wearing shirts or half a shirt a lot of the time, and I would, too, if I had abs like that. But he's not the biggest guy, but he is strong at 5'11", maybe he's put on what, Evan?
209, I believe was his combine.
What they have him listed. Yeah.
But it's all muscle, and he's shifty, can make defenders miss in open space, and then there's just this gear he can kick into. Evidence of his 40 time, but when he taps into that, he can go. So it seems like he has all the requisite skills. I think if he does slip that far, maybe somebody gets a pretty good steal in the draft.
Well, Scott, the one thing that jumps out to me about him, and I think John alluded to it, is his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield and also the yardage that he averaged per reception. But I think, and you would know this better than maybe most, considering you've watched just about every single snap, where does he lie in pass protection? Is there concern that if you leave him in on passing downs, he doesn't get the ball, that he can handle those defensive fronts? Is that a weakness, or is that something that he actually was given a great deal of confidence in by the coaching staff?
Early in his career, that was probably the hole in his game. But, again, it's something that developed over the last couple of years, and Illinois didn't take him out on clear passing downs this past year. I mean, they leaned on him a lot, and I wouldn't say he's an elite level pass protector, as a running back, but he's not going to hurt you either. And I think that's a skill that can still be developed. I mean, was in college 5 years, but he's still young, and the foundation is there, and certainly I saw him improve over the last 2-3 years, in that regard.
Scott, good stuff, my friend. We appreciate it. He's the Illini beat reporter for the News Gazette, both football and basketball, if I'm not mistaken, right, Scott? We appreciate the time. Thank you so much, and good luck next year.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it. Good stuff there. We probably got information on 5 or 6 day 1 and day 2 picks between those two schools. I will say this, Lance, then we're going to get to your calls. We got 2 people on hold, 1 open line. Let's get on it at 201-939-4513. Devin Witherspoon's not going to get to 25.
No, I mean, he could be a top 10 pick.
Could be.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the size and the measurables scare some people off, and they go for like a Gonzalez or a Porter or a Banks, but still, I'd be blown away if he's sitting there. Same deal for Skoronski. I'd be fall off my chair, blown away if he somehow gets to 25. If he does, same with Witherspoon. Either guy, you run to the podium, you give him the card, and you do a dance of joy. Neither one of those guys are getting there. In terms of the first round, Lance, I would think about Atabare. I think he's kind of that positionless player that Wink would like to have in his defense, and I think he's the quicker, explosive guy to the Dexter Lawrence mammoth guy. And then in the second round, quite frankly, I'd start thinking about Cindy Brown. I think the way he describes Cindy Brown, doesn't it sound an awful lot like Julian Love to you?
Yeah,
the way
versatile guy.
Him?
Sure.
100%. And frankly, if you're looking for a running back, Saquon's just on a 1-year deal right now, and Chase Brown's sitting there at the end of round 3, I'd have no problem picking him, to be quite honest with you.
Or he could fall even further back and you grab him.
If you get him in the
third
fourth round, that is
maybe
steal.
extremely high for a guy like that.
100%. So for me, I think there are some really interesting players. You don't think, Illinois and Northwestern, a bunch of guys that are going to get drafted high, but some really nice players coming out from those 2 schools.
Well, and think about the 2 coaches that have been there, though. You've got NFL caliber coaches, so I think that rubbed off, right, on a lot of these prospects, and that's why you're seeing them. Maybe it took a little bit longer for some of them, but now they're really starting to hit their stride. I think, to me, that's a product of the coaches that they were around. Yeah, finding versatile safeties is a luxury to have in today's NFL, and something tells me Wink Martindale, after losing Julian Love, who could play corner, who could play safety, who you can mix and match, if you can find somebody to replace him in the draft, you would definitely sign up for that. Even when Joe Shane spoke to the media at the owners' meetings, the one thing he reflected on was some of the guys that they didn't get to re-sign, and Julian Love, you could tell there was some emotion there, a little bit frustrated that they weren't able to get anything done.
I feel like timing wasn't, the way they've kind of talked about it, feels like timing was kind of an issue there.
Yeah, and that's what happens. It's not to get off topic, but it's the whole debate about Lamar Jackson. Do you give him an offer? You're going to have money bottled up for a few days. If you want to target somebody else, that's the thing you got to weigh as an organization.
And the other thing, too, that somebody brought up, and not to get off into the weeds here, as Howard Cross would say, but if you're going to go make an offer sheet to Lamar, do it after the draft. Because then you don't lose your first-round pick this year, and you don't lose your first-round pick till next year.
Sure.
If you do bring him over.
Well, but you're going to lose a pick regardless of how you do it.
But if you know you're picking high this year, like, for example, if you're the Colts, why would you make that offer sheet
No, of course, because you have a top 5
Because you have the 4th overall pick, right? So if you're the Colts and you're like, all right, maybe I'll do that. The Colts could be thinking, all right, maybe we don't draft a quarterback at 4. We just give all the money to Lamar after the draft, and then that's how you roll. Yeah. So, again, I just think it's interesting. And now we'll try to get to your calls here, 201-939-4513. Make sure you go subscribe to the Giants Huddle podcast, folks. A lot of great stuff on there. We just talked to Ryan Wilson from CBS Sports. He's their mock draft master. A lot of mock drafts coming out of him, but also just knows a lot about the draft prospects. We had a great conversation. And go back to last week, we had Thomas Dimitroff, the general manager from the Falcons, a former, and Rick Saratella. And later on this week, we're going to have Field Yates from ESPN and Chad Reuter, who just put a 4-round mock draft up on NFL.com. And we're going to dig deep with him, do a lot of like day 2 and early day 3 picks with Chad. So make sure you go check out the Giants Huddle podcast on your favorite podcast platform, the Giants mobile app, and at giants.com/podcast. And both for the Giants Huddle and for Big Blue Kickoff Live, folks, remember, if you like the podcast or an Apple podcast, please go and leave a 5-star positive review. It helps us get more searchable in those engines. So people looking for a Giants podcast, ours will be the first to pop up. So if you can go leave that positive review. And again, if you put it up on Twitter and you send it in, we'll read it on the air. You can send in questions with that too to hashtag Giants Chat. All right, let's go to 201-939-4513 and start with Hugo in New Jersey. He will lead us off. Hugo, what's going on?
Good afternoon, guys.
Hi, Hugo.
I took a look at Bucky Brooks' mock draft 3.0, and if you use that as a benchmark, and this is sort of my personal curse, I guess, every single player that I like was taken before a pick.
Welcome to picking at 25, Hugo.
Welcome to life in the NFL.
You know what did surprise me? 5 corners were gone.
Well, there's a lot of depth there at that position.
I'm looking at it right now, Hugo. Who was the 5th guy? Was it Forbes or was it Cam Smith?
It was Cam Smith.
It was Cam Smith? Okay.
Yep, it was Cam Smith. So, having said that, and, listening to what Joe Shane and John Mara said in the last couple of days at the owners' meeting, they acknowledged that stopping the run was their biggest concern coming out of last season. And if you read between the lines, because people said, you signed Bobby O and
Nunez Roches.
Nacho.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you better? And sort of Joe's reaction was kind of a lukewarm, yeah, we're better, which kind of suggests they're thinking that more work needs to be done there. And, I'm starting to like what I hear about this defensive tackle from Northwestern. Yeah. I just want to see if you guys could compare with another guy that seems to be mocked in that area, Massey Smith. Now, they're both physical freaks, right, but in very different ways. And I'm hearing that maybe the production wasn't there for either player. So
yep.
Who's actually looking better on film, more disruptive on film? I also think, I'm a little bit conflicted here because listening to what Andre Patterson has said in the past, I would think that Mazi Smith would be more the profile of the player he would like to work with as opposed to the shorter player, but maybe I'm reading too much into that. So I'll turn it over to you and have you compare and contrast the players.
No, thank you, Hugo, and great call and a very good question. Mazi Smith is I'm not going to call him a replacement because I don't think Dexter Lawrence is getting anywhere, but I would put him in the Dexter Lawrence category in terms of type of player.
He's 6'3", 323.
He's a large fella. Yeah. He was number 1 on Bruce Feldman's Freaks List, which comes out every August, and if you guys don't subscribe to The Athletic, go do it because it's the Freaks List is just worth it. He basically goes through all of college football and the guys that do the freakiest stuff in testing and stuff like that. He was number 1. I don't see that level of explosion on tape when I watch him. He's extremely powerful. The way he'll make most of his plays when I watched him is that he'll engage, uses long arms. He's 33 3/4 inch arms, which is really long. I think Dexter I think he's 34 flat, so they're very close. He'll lock the guy out, and he'll just literally wait for the running back to commit to a hole, move the offensive lineman aside, and go make the play. He wasn't really like an up-the-field penetrator type of player to me watching him. There was almost no pass rush production. Adebawore, and we just heard from the Northwestern guy, Lance, he played end for them more than he played tackle. I'm with Louie, though. I think he's more of a 3-technique defensive tackle. And for the Giants, I think then he could be a pass rusher inside on passing downs if Leonard or Dexter aren't on the field, right? And then if you're in your base defense, I think he could play a 3-4 defensive end because he's 280. He can handle that. And he's shorter, only 6'2", but he's got 34-inch arms, so he has that natural leverage. And he's twitchier and more explosive than Mazi Smith to me. So I think it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for more of a plugger, Smith. Stop the run, Smith. Guy that can maybe do a little bit more getting up the field and being more disruptive for me, that's Adebawore. And I do think of all the defensive tackles, assuming Kalijah Cansey's off the board, Lance, that's another one of these undersized defensive tackles. We'll have a guy from Pittsburgh in the coming weeks to talk about him. Those are the only 3 defensive tackles that I would really have in the mix as a potential late first-round pick where the Giants select.
Well, I think you also look at this league, it's all about upside and athleticism. I think Adebawore fits that bill more so than Smith does. I think there's more that you could do with him. Personally, if I'm going to invest a first-round pick, a late-round pick, I want a guy that can play multiple positions.
And remember, Smith didn't test either. That's the other thing. He's supposed to be this physical freak, right, on Fedman's Freak List. Well, he didn't do any testing at the Combine, and I don't think he tested at his pro day either. So while that's out in the ether, we haven't actually seen the freakiness in testing. Sure. Which is going to hurt him, I think.
Yeah, because, once again, I think Adebawore has a little bit of that. He has that intrigue of, okay, maybe his arm length is in question or whatever it may be, but the way Northwestern utilized him, if you apply that in Wink's defense, I think Wink can toy with him very effectively. And I like guys because do you want to draft an interior defensive lineman who you may take off the field in passing downs? No, not in the first round. I would want a guy where there's no question about, do I have to remove him from the mix? I don't think you have to remove Adetomiwa from the mix. I think you can keep him on the field.
You can play all 3 downs.
Yeah, so, that's more of a reason. It's the bang for the buck type of mentality. But the other thing that I wouldn't read into, going back to the phone call, just because Joe Shane indicated and John Mara that they wanted to help solidify the run defense. Doesn't mean that they have to take somebody to help that in the first round.
No.
Okay?
But Joe Schoen has indicated, though, that big, not run stopping necessarily, but that, those bigger defensive linemen to him are almost a premium position now because there just aren't a lot of them.
Sure, I get that. But if you're going to take the player off the field on third down, he doesn't hold as much premium.
Agreed. That's why I wouldn't, me personally, I would not draft Mozzie Smith in the first round.
Yeah, and I'm with you. If you had the choice between the two, I would go with Adebawore. I just think there's more upside and there's more you could do with him. But I do think that they did help their cause with the run defense. I think Nacho and Okereke will help. Mm-hmm. Do you want to add more depth? Absolutely. Jihad Ward, remember, was brought back, and he was an integral piece of the run defense, too. So let's not forget about that. But could you find somebody maybe in the mid-round that could help you, and maybe you keep him on the field in early down? Sure. I don't think you need to use a first-round pick. I guess my point is to address that area.
And remember, too, Leonard Williams is on the last year of his deal. So you talk about future-proofing, right?
Yeah.
They said they haven't really talked to him about an extension yet or a renegotiation, whatever you want to call it. That's what they said at the owners' meeting. So we don't know if that's going to happen. So if this was Leonard Williams last year here, because look, if you're going to extend Dexter Lawrence and pay him at the top of the market, right? Can you pay two defensive tackles that much money in terms of roster building strategy? I think that gets tough, right? I think it's tough to do that.
Well, especially since you just paid your quarterback too.
Right. So you want to backfill that position with really talented people in the draft. So the Adebawore thing's interesting because if you just watch the tape, you don't think this guy's a first-round pick. You think, to me, you watch his tape, he's a day 2 pick.
Well, and he was initially projected as a mid-second rounder.
Yeah, and even third rounder by some people. Then he shows up at the Senior Bowl, which is real football, right? That's real football. And they could not block him in one-on-ones. Dominant. Throwing people around, going around, strength, the whole 9 yards. Really good in one-on-ones and in practice. Then he shows up the combine, right? Weighs in at just 6'1.5", or measures at 6'1.5", 282. Small for a defensive tackle. 34-inch arms. Again, we talked about the natural leverage, right? Low but long. That's good. I'd rather be low and long than tall and long, to be honest with you. Then he runs a 4.49 40-yard dash, which again, he ran as a defensive end, but he's a defensive tackle. He's 280 pounds. That's a record for a defensive tackle. 99.
I think it's a record for a guy that's 270 or more.
Right.
I believe is the way that they worded it.
99.9. And again, I'm looking at RAS, the relative athletic score. Kent Lee Platt, we'll have him on later in the process to talk about all these scores. 99.9th percentile, 40-yard dash, 20-yard split, 10-yard split. Okay, well, that's not it. 37.5-inch vertical jump. It's a lot of pounds going straight up in the air. 99.7th percentile. Broad jump, 10 foot 5 inches. 99.7 percentile. Oh, I'm not done. He did the agility drills too, which not a lot of these guys do. 4.26 shuttle, 98.30 percentile, 7.13 three cone, 98.9 percentile. It's ridiculous how this guy at that size can move. And frankly, I wouldn't want to put more weight on him, Lance. Because if you look at him, he's pretty rocked up as it is. I'd rather have him be lean and mean than put some weight on and lose some of that explosiveness.
Well, you want him to retain his flexibility to play on the edge, too.
Yeah.
Let's not forget about that. If you beef him up, then you're limiting what you could do upside-wise. Clearly, he's an athletic freak, and I think you were talking about him doing all of these drills. He said to himself, well, if I'm being projected as a third-rounder, mid-second rounder, might as well try to gain some leverage in the conversation. He goes out, wows everybody, and now look, all of a sudden people are talking about him as a potential late first-round pick.
Yeah, and
that's how the process works.
I think, if I had to guess right now, I think he gets into the first round.
Well, based on mock drafts, he's getting in. I mean, even the very last pick, some have him as a projection.
I think I think because there aren't that many actual first-round grades in this draft class, I think end of the first round, it's going to get crazy. I think names are going to pop up that nobody's expecting.
Which happens a lot.
They'll fall off their chair. I think it's going to get a little bit crazy at the end of that first round. Hey, Giant fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all of the exclusive member benefits, go visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. Hey, the Giants official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. All right, let's go back to the phones and say what up to Scott in New Mexico. Scott, what's going on?
Hi, guys. The bone of controversy, I guess, for the week has been the center position. I gleaned from Joe Shane's press conference yesterday that he looks like he wants to try Bredesen at the center position.
Well, he threw out 3 guys. He also threw out Jack Anderson, and he threw out Shane Lemieux. Those were the 3 guys he brought up.
None of which are natural centers.
No,
by
well,
the way.
but we talked about that.
Correct.
We've been talking about forever.
Yeah.
Right. I looked at all this. Well, I looked at 5 different centers. I saw game films of different guys, including Joe Tippmann, Steve Avila, who's a guard center out of TCU, Ricky Stromberg. There was a guy also out of Michigan that nobody's talked about.
Oluwatimi?
Yes, and I think he was the Outland Trophy winner and also the Remington Award winner.
Excellent college player. I'm not sure how well that's going to translate. He had a rough time in Mobile at the Senior Bowl.
Okay, but those were, and I don't think there's I don't think any center there warrants the 25th pick. Looking at the game films, anyways, of all of them. So that's my first question. I'm sort of leaning towards a defensive player. I liked your idea, John. I think you had mentioned it, of trying to get for the center position, if he hasn't retired yet, Rodney Hudson out of Houston. And also,
I think that was Lance's idea, by the way, just for the record.
Oh, we were talking about that the other week. Yeah, we threw out a few guys.
Okay, well, that's a great idea if he's not retiring. I know he has some injuries. And then I think, John, you had suggested Marcus Peters as a possibility for the corner position, which I also thought was
I thought about him. Once you get past the draft and maybe past when you start worrying about compensatory picks, and that I think that happens in June, right? When guys no longer count towards the compensatory formulas in May, whenever it is. And if nobody has him yet, he has experience in Wink's system. You want some veterans at corner. Again, it would have to be a cheap thing, though, because right now, again, Paul brought this up on the NFLPA site, and that's not up to date, obviously, but that's as close as we have to official numbers. They're $5 million over the cap, which is impossible because you can't be over the cap at this time of the year.
They definitely did not update that.
Needless to say, though, they don't have the money right now to give out a lot of money to corner. So again, if you can get him for cheap later on in the process, given the relationship with Wink, that's the only reason I brought him up of something maybe you can keep an eye on.
Sounds great. The other point I wanted to get at, and my last point, there's, if I'm not mistaken, 5 tight ends on the Giants staff right now. You have obviously Waller, who's going to be the center of attention, and then you have Bellinger, and then you have Cager, who's actually a pretty good athlete, and then is Myrick still on the team?
Yeah, Myrick is still.
Myrick, and so is Vanette. So I believe
Tommy Sweeney.
Tommy Sweeney, too. That's 6.
Tommy
then,
Sweeney.
right?
They just signed from Buffalo.
6 tight ends. And I'm trying to think, how do you envision, do you think there'll be a number of 2 tight end sets? Because I don't want to negate Bellinger's pass-catching ability. He was starting to come on. And obviously, Waller's still going to be the center of the offense in regards to the way they're scheming. It looks like they're doing what Kansas City is doing. But the real key is to integrate some of the other players because Cager was starting to come on as well. And, you don't want to throw those players, sort of under the water.
Well, but remember, you got to understand, Scott, they all have different skill sets. For example, Sweeney was pretty much a blocker. Sweeney's not going out and running routes and catching passes. I mean, Waller has done in half a season what Sweeney's done as an entire career.
And Waller's not going to block. He's a receiver.
Yeah, so, some things they just call for, all right, if you have these 2 guys on the field, one guy's going to stay in and block, the other guy's going to run routes.
And Waller might not even be attached to the line of scrimmage most of the time. He's going to be lined up as a wide receiver or a slot.
Yeah.
Okay, so you envision they'll be able to still incorporate Bellinger into the offense in some way to make him effective. Now, that was my main point. I wanted to know basically how they were going to use those guys.
I believe since Waller's virtually a wide receiver, you're going to see a lot more 12 personnel with Bellinger on the line as your primary tight end and Waller on the field as your second tight end, but he's going to be lined up more of as a slot or an outside wide receiver.
Well, because also when you look at the roster, Bellinger, I think, is one of the most versatile guys from the standpoint of blocking and receiving.
Correct.
You don't really have somebody that fits that equation. I mean, Cager, remember, he's still very young in terms of making the transition. Yeah. So I wouldn't even throw him in. And we talked about Sweeney has limitations in terms of receiver. He's a blocker. So Bellinger is extremely appealing, Scott, because you could do a lot more with him and you keep the defense guessing.
Right.
Because when Bellinger's on the field, maybe he's going to stay in as a blocker. Maybe he's going to run out and do a route. So there's an appeal from that standpoint.
Okay. So with the 25th pick, in your opinion, I'll take the answers off the air. Is it better for the Giants to look for an offensive player or a defensive player based on the current positions that they have now? And I'll take your answers off the air, guys. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to give the answer that I'm sure fans are tired of hearing. You draft players, not positions. So that's the first answer. So it's wholly dependent on who's available. I could say, I want to draft a wide receiver. Well, if a wide receiver is not there, that's good enough. And there's a player that's much better at a different position, you pick the other player. So that's the thing I'll put out there first. Now, assuming in this fictitious world that Scott's putting out there that everybody is graded the same, and you have a choice of, a guy here, guy at 5 or 6 different positions with the exact same grade, which will never happen, but for this hypothetical conversation, we'll have it. For me, Lance, I still think a wide receiver, that's a upgrade to what they have, especially when that can play outside. They just keep signing guys that are primarily slot receivers.
Yeah, well, mainly because there's so many injuries within that slot position, too, I think.
100%.
Joe Shane wants to protect himself.
And I get that. So I would like to have a guy that can win outside at wide receiver. That's an upgrade over what they have. A guy that's a really good route runner. I mean, I don't think Jackson Smith-Njigba's going to get there, but he's kind of emerged as my number one wideout. Jordan Addison, I'd be happy with him, too. I'd be happy there. I love the tight end class, but now I think you wait if you're going to go there till day 3, probably round 4 or so. I think round 3 or 4 for a running back if you want to go there, because I think it's a deep running back class too. I mean, I would consider a guard or a center. It's just not a premium position. I think you can go out and find one of those in free agency if you need to and not break the bank. So I think I would, and I don't think anybody at those 2 positions in this particular draft class is someone that I would be like, I have to have that guy. Like if Tyler Linderbaum was in this draft and he's sitting there at 25, I'd think about that. I don't think John Michael Schmitz is as good as Tyler Linderbaum, to be honest with you. I know that the size and all that stuff, but that's just my opinion.
Bucky Brooks, by the way, has him going to the Giants at 25.
He does.
In the
That's
latest
correct.
mock.
And Jeremiah in his last trip had Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin, the center, going to the Giants at 25. So it's a need, so it's going to be a popular player to slide in there.
And a lot of those mock drafts are based on need, or at least maybe when they make their decisions, which is not the best route to go because teams are not thinking through that narrow lens.
Anyway, I would say for me, personally, corner receiver. Those are my top 2 positions where if you could find somebody at the right value there, those are the 2 positions I would focus on, me personally.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And the reason why I like both of those positions is my response, and you hit on what I was going to say, is I always say this, you're not drafting for this year. You're drafting for the duration of the rookie contract. So how do you find that middle ground, John? How do you tackle need this year, but also feel good that it helps you in the long run? Wide receiver does. There's room for a wide receiver to join this team right now and then be a part of their plans moving forward. There's also room for a corner to come aboard, and you feel good about that player also being in the mix well beyond this year because you don't know what's going to happen with Adoree Jackson. You don't know what the roster is going to look like in 2024. So I'm going to use a first-round pick. It's got to meet both of those things. The player can make inroads this year, but also I know he can then take a step up on the depth chart the following year. I think both of those positions apply.
Yep.
I think those are the most sensible ones.
All right, and we got a tweet coming in from Mike at Mr. BX74. I've been listening to all the draft coverage, and you haven't covered the edge position too much. Joe believes in positional value. Wide receiver, cornerback is or 25. I could see edge as a sneaky need. It always, since Azeez Ojulari has been dealing with some injuries. He wonders about Nolan Smith and Will McDonald as they both fit the scheme. First of all, I'll agree with his criticism. I don't think I have focused as much on edge with a lot of the draft guys I've had on. I'm going to switch that when we do Chad Reuter this afternoon. That's going to post later in the week. I wonder, Lance, because you can never have enough pass rushers. When Joe Shane was in Buffalo, they certainly prioritized that position. We see in Baltimore, they kind of cycle through edge rushers, let them leave, then they just draft another one. That's kind of how they operated. Go back to Matthew Judon, guys like that.
Never had a guy that recorded 10 sacks, by the way, still.
Zadarius Smith, right? Another one that was there. He moved on.
Yep.
So, yeah. And again, I think that's, we talked about, right? That's Wink's system. It spreads the wealth a little bit when it comes to sacks. So, do you think they would consider an edge rusher there at 25?
I think they consider more of a guy that's interchangeable inside-outside, which is what we were talking about earlier.
Well, so that's my question then, because they got two guys he throws out there are Nolan Smith and Will McDonald. Those guys, 240, 245. They're either off-ball linebackers or they're edge players. They cannot play on the defense.
So we're talking about tweeners then.
Yes, but I think in a 3-4, I mean, that's not much different than what Ojulari and Thibodeau was. So would you draft a guy this guy's an edge player. Would you draft a guy to kind of be that third wheel to that trio then, to just rotate in and out as pass rushers, or do you think you're not getting the value based on what you already have at that spot at 25?
Yeah, I don't think you're getting the value based on what you already have, unless, once again, it's the projection business. They think a year in the system, they lose another guy, he gets more playing time, skyrockets. Now, that's a projection selection, though. I would want more substance in what I'm bringing in
for the first
at 25 in the first round. Yeah. So I would lean a little bit more in the other direction. That's why, to me, Adebawore is appealing, because I go back to you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting a guy that can help stop the run, apply pressure up the gut. You can move him to the outside. You can keep him on the field with your other pass rushers. If you're going to go in that direction at that position, that's the bill that I think the player needs to fit, as opposed to maybe we get him in as a rotational guy. I think you want more than that. I mean, you used a pick on Kayvon Thibodeau. I understand he was higher than 25, but you weren't rotating him.
Oh, no, there was a gaping hole waiting for him to step in.
Correct. That's my point. So 25 doesn't change that for me, John. 25, I don't want a rotational guy. I want a guy that's going to get on the field and make an indent in year number one, assuming he stays healthy, of course.
I tend to agree with that. But if you want to draft an edge guy in the second or third round,
that's
or
fine.
Fourth round,
that's a different story.
As a guy to rotate, and look, this is a pretty deep class at edge, so I think you might be able to grab somebody a little bit later. I think that does make a little bit more sense.
I think also they need to ask themselves, and this goes back to the need versus the short term versus the long term, where do they feel there's a big hole also on the depth chart? They may go to Wink, and Wink may say, there's a free agent on the market. You used Marcus Peters. Maybe there's somebody else. I know Calais Campbell just joined the Falcons, by the way. We had been talking about him, too, given his ties. And he says to Joe, listen, if the draft doesn't play out accordingly and somebody doesn't fall in line to us,
go get this guy.
Get this guy. He knows the system. We
He'll
bring him in.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I'm sure they're having some of those conversations. And then all of a sudden, John, you look at your draft board and you say, okay, well, Wink gave us a solution there, but the interior offensive line, Brian Dable doesn't have anybody in mind that he figures can plug in. That absolutely is going to shape your decision-making.
Would you be okay with center round one?
I would be okay with center. Yeah, I know you mentioned that, maybe it's not as valued. If you're talking about Daniel Jones, you just invested in him, John.
That's fair.
I would not disvalue the center position, okay? He touches the ball on every snap. You need those guys to be on the same page. And look at the division. This is why center is important for the Giants. What Dallas, what Philadelphia, and what Washington pose on the interior of the line.
That's fair.
Up the gut. I completely disagree with people that say, no, don't worry, center's an afterthought. Not in this division. The NFC East, you better take the G.I. Joe underwear. You better throw that to the wayside, okay? You better take the Pampers and throw that to the wayside.
G.I. Joe's tough. Why are you ranking out G.I. Joe for?
It looks the part when you're younger, okay? I speak from experience. But that doesn't mean
Lance wearing his camo undies.
There you go. Now, if that doesn't paint the picture here on this program, I don't know what does.
I know.
The bottom line is we circle back to
Make that the teaser, Dom.
Importance and value of center. I could have went Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I went with G.I. Joe.
Nah, G.I. Joe's and G.I. Joe was G.I. Joe was big in the
Sergeant
80s when
Slaughter
I was growing up.
too, and everything. Yeah,
little Roadblock, Cobra Commander, Destro.
There you go.
Let's rock and roll.
All that good stuff.
Absolutely.
Perfect model.
Rock and roll, also a G.I. Joe character, by the way, just for the record. All right, so you would be okay with center there, and I would not be upset with center. I'd be okay with it, but you better be a damn good player.
Oh, well,
better be a damn good player.
You better do your homework. You better
be getting like a Creed Humphrey level player if you're picking a center at 25.
Also, I wouldn't mind if he has a little guard experience too.
Can't hurt.
I think that adds some value.
I agree, and I love Steve Avila out of TCU, and a lot of people think he can play center. Maybe he could be a second-round guy if he gets there. I don't know. Here's my last question before we say goodbye. When would you first consider drafting a running back? How early?
I would probably say fourth round.
Fourth round? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
once again,
I go back and forth round 3 and round 4, to be honest with you.
Well, if you're going to take him in the third round a little bit earlier, then there's got to be a very big appeal in terms of receiver skill set.
Yeah, he has to be able to complement Barkley.
Correct. I'm not taking a big bruiser who I can get later on in the round. And once again, it's no disrespect to some of the players that are in this class, because I think there are appealing guys. It's just, you look at the Giants' needs, you look at Buffalo school of thought with Dable and Joe Shane. You're talking about that influence, and the Devin Singletaries and the Zach Mosses of the world.
They love drafting running backs middle rounds, though. That's what they did.
Yeah. And actually,
Moss and Singletary were around 3 and round 4.
Correct. They were actually relatively high picks, but you wonder. You said you learned from your experience what happened good, and maybe what happened where you could have waited. So I'd still go to the 4th round on that front. Absolutely. You got it. Yep.
Lance Meadow, John Schmeelk. I'm here, but just not on the show the next 2 days. It'll be tomorrow, Lance and Casillas, and then Dottino and Lance on Friday. So make sure you go check that out on Big Blue Kickoff Live as we continue to cover the NFL Draft. And we are just over 4 weeks away. I believe 29
Time
days,
flies.
if I'm not mistaken. So make sure you stay tuned to all the coverage, and make sure you stay tuned to the Giants Huddle podcast as well. And again, for an Apple podcast, leave those 5-star reviews. It'll help us an awful lot. For Lance Meadow, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on Big Blue Kickoff Live.